Happy Wednesday. Wait, happy Thursday. So I have been having a pretty chill week, although I don't have a single reason to have a chill week. Like, my week should be insane because, one, I have so much work to do. Two, it's kind of been a crazy week for my team because we have leadership visiting, like senior leadership, and they're all in London, but I wasn't really invited. So I am the foreign correspondent at the moment. I have been for a while, but I mean, I'm playing that role even more fiercely these next few days because they're all literally in the same country and I'm not. But it's okay. I don't mind. Burped. Anyway, I woke up feeling like I have a sore throat, or the beginnings of a sore throat situation, which absolutely freaking sucks. Last time I had a sore throat, I ended up losing like 60% of my hearing. I was almost completely deaf on one side. I would just hear muffled sounds, and unless someone is right next to my ear screaming into my eardrum, I wouldn't be able to understand what they were saying. So that was really rough because what had happened was I collected a lot of fluid behind my eardrum because of my inflamed throat. I don't know the connection, but that's what happened. And I ended up having to get on steroids to get rid of the water and then have my hearing go back to normal. But it was a whole ordeal that lasted a couple months. I really hope I don't end up in that situation again. So I've been doing what I can to make sure that I take medicine, that I just do what I can to soothe my throat so that it doesn't get too inflamed. Other than that, I've had a lot on my mind, and I feel like today I got a sign as to what I should do, but I know I'm too like chicken shit to do it. But I was watching a video and it was a Huda Beauty interview, and she was talking about how as a result of the recession in 2008, she lost her job. She worked in the finance sector as a recruiter and she lost her job. And she had just moved to Dubai, and it was really rough because she got laid off shortly after, and she actually enjoyed what she did. But when she got laid off and she was kind of lost, her sister gave her the idea to get into beauty because that had always been a passion of hers and she did it in private. And so she started blogging. But what caught my attention was what she said about had she not been laid off, she probably would have still been doing finance. And obviously, she's a pioneer in the beauty sector, and so it's like undebatable that she made the right choice and that she's in the right place and that she found her purpose. And not only that, but she pretty much pioneered, like I can't even, like, she's a trailblazer for Arabs and for women in many ways. And it's like undebatable that she made the right choice, but it's crazy to think that had she not been laid off, she probably would still be doing a corporate job. And then on the flip side, yesterday I was at a Women's Day event, the Forbes 30-50 event, which I have been going to for the last 3 years. And in this event, the session was about mental health, but the topic of COVID came up, and how having that free time, obviously that's like a big privilege to refer to that period as like free time, but having a little bit more free time, or basically stepping away from the day-to-day routine, allowed many people to do creative things, to pivot careers, to take on passion projects. And Huma Abedin, who was the moderator, sort of reflected and said that during the COVID lockdown period, basically from March to December 2020, she wrote her book, her memoir, which I read and I loved. But the idea was that she talked about how she would not have been able to do that had it not been for taking a step back from a really fast-paced life. And that really got me thinking of, do I need like this life-shattering event to happen, something as big as COVID or getting laid off, to pursue my goals and aspirations? Like, I feel like those life-shattering events, they're obviously much more impactful because you're often stuck and there's not much else to do, and so you feel more propelled to take on a big risk or a big project because you don't have much to lose. But in my case, I'm in this comfort zone. Not only that, but I feel like there's so much at stake because from a personal side, I grew up with a mom who sacrificed everything for her kids, and that meant not having a career for herself and not being financially independent by any stretch of the imagination. And she always regretted that, and she always warned us against it. And so I always have this voice in the back of my mind, like, what if you quit and then do your own thing, but it's unsuccessful, and so you end up in a place where you're dependent and regretful. So there's that like personal complex, I guess, that makes it harder for me to take on that risk because I'm always like, what if, and I have all these voices, including my mom's voice saying, don't do it. And then there's this thing around how a lot of my job is wrapped up in my identity, and I think this is a horrible thing. But many people know me as an employee of X company, and that can sometimes warp myself, like the way I value myself, because I place a lot of value on the part of my identity as an employee of said company. And obviously that's wrong, but I know that it shapes the way many people perceive me and the value that I can bring to a relationship and to the world, which is messed up, to say the least. But it is a factor that plays a role in the decision-making process. And then another factor that I think about is like this idea of like, don't be a quitter. You wouldn't be thinking about quitting if you didn't feel challenged by what you're doing, and if you didn't feel stretched and inadequate at times. And so maybe quitting is the easy thing to do, and maybe you should give it your all and push through and keep trying. And so there's also that voice that's like, you want to quit because it's easy. Otherwise, you would stay and give it your all, and then eventually find that balance and maybe be able to do something on the side while you're working. So there's like this idea of being a quitter and quitting when times get rough and not wanting to do that. And so I also struggle with that part of the equation. And then the final thing is not feeling so stable in my relationship and where I'm currently based and like this season of life, because I feel like I can't make a decision based on my current setup because I feel like my setup is fleeting and not stable. And so I feel like maybe it's not the right time. Maybe I should push myself to stay. Like now my let's say my short-term goal is at least till November, which is the 1-year mark where I became an FTE. 10 years, I would be celebrating my 10th year as a employee of this company, which is insane. But one part of me is like, at least stay till then and see how you feel. Another part is like, why don't you stay for a year in this role? So I effectively started this role in August. So in theory, it's been a couple of months. So why don't I try it out for a year? So basically till August. So that's kind of the two frameworks I have in my mind. But of course, I don't know, part of me feels like the sense of urgency to figure this out. But yeah, I generally feel lost, confused, overwhelmed, unsure what's right. Um, so yeah, that's what I've had on my mind, just a lot of career and life and figuring things out. And um, I ended up, so after 2 years of going to the Forbes 50 event, this year I was like, I'm not gonna go because I felt like I wasn't really making the most of it. Like, I'm supposed to network, but I would feel too shy and socially anxious to do it. I enjoyed a lot of the sessions, but generally couldn't wait. Like I like anything in life, I see it as like a checklist, and I was like checking through the agenda, not being really present. And then it would be expensive too. Like I would spend 3 nights in Abu Dhabi and take transportation to get there, and I would essentially like miss a few days of work, and it just felt like it wasn't worth it. But then as I made the decision not to go, I got an invite to attend because a friend of mine, an ex-colleague, was speaking. And I thought it was a sign that maybe I should go, but I'll just do it differently this time, and I'll go for just the sessions I cared about, and I wouldn't spend the night there, and I would just go for like a half a day thing. And it was the right decision, and that's what I ended up doing. And I feel like generally the event felt very hypocritical because I had sensed over the last few years that hypocrisy brewing, because the first year I went, there was like this whole hoo-ha around, oh, Hillary Clinton's gonna be there, and she was like one of the chair people or like one of the event organizers or something. Anyway, she was like the star guest, and many people got tickets because of that, but then she ended up deciding not to go like the day up or the day prior because of the war on Ukraine, as though she was an active politician at the time, but like she had all these press interviews to do about the war and give her a perspective, and so she ended up not showing up. She did like a remote Q&A. But anyway, I just remember the topic of the Ukraine war was so fresh, and they talked about it a lot. The second year, Hillary shows up, and guess what? Like, the Ukraine war is top of mind. They talk about it so much. They got like Ukrainian entrepreneurs, and the wife of the Ukrainian president was there, and she did like a talk or a panel, and it was like a very, like the Ukraine war had a very big presence at the event. And then this year, despite being so close to Gaza and the situation there, people could hardly string together a sentence of solidarity. They could barely even utter the word Gaza without sandwiching it between other countries and conflicts. And I just thought that was very tone deaf. So that's the first observation. The second is, generally I had this like experience where I was dissociating a lot and just thinking of how pointless a lot of these women events and women initiatives are. And a few of the speakers, like, they would say things like, you know, for example, one of them, her company would invest in companies, and so she was talking about how they don't look at gender when making investments. And I do feel like this movement towards, oh, like, it doesn't make sense to create things just for women. No, we should make sure that the thing that's available works well for everyone rather than creating things just for women. And that was like, I felt like that was the trend that we're moving towards. But nonetheless, I felt like I kept associating a lot of the time and thinking, this is so silly. And it felt so performative. And it felt like we were all in these blazers that felt like clown suits, and that this is so silly. I don't know if I just feel like a lot of these inclusion events, they're like propaganda, or they're just performative and pointless. I don't know if it's part of aging or if I just feel so jaded. But that's like the feeling I got throughout. So if we're doing thorns and roses, I would say that's the biggest thorn, is realizing, like taking a step back and realizing, wow, this is so silly. Like we're all just drinking the Kool-Aid, and instead of making sure that the current processes and systems work well for everyone, we're like creating spaces just for one group and kind of creating an echo chamber. And I don't know, it just made me feel a little strange. But on the flip side, a rose is that they had this one speaker. Her name is Catherine, and for me, her story was the most inspiring. So it started off with her reflecting on stockings and this idea that her stockings wouldn't make it through the course of the day. They would often end up getting ripped by just like her nail grazing her stocking, or I don't know, like walking out and then it getting ripped in public transportation or in the process of wearing it. And so she started to wonder, like, why haven't we figured this out as a society? I think she even said, like, there's self-driving cars and there's all these things, but we haven't cracked this one thing, and we've been wearing stockings for decades now. And she talked about how the fashion industry in general, like the clothing that we wear, it hasn't really seen a like revolution or a lot of technology advancements. I think she said since the invention of nylon, or since like nylon became incorporated in outfits. Anyway, I'm probably butchering a lot of this, but the idea was that she looked at something that we've been using for decades and she thought there must be a better way. And so she started researching the strongest polymers that essentially don't rip that easily. She bought a bunch of stockings from different places and different factories, and she would take them through this test where she would wrap them around her finger and then pull, and then many of them would either snap or rip. And so all of them actually did. And then she did a lot of research around like what's the sturdiest material, and then she realized that it was like this material that's used in bulletproof vests. And so she connected with a factory and got a huge spool of this material and then shipped it to a factory that creates stockings, and that material was so strong that it essentially broke their machine, but they were able to salvage a small piece and kept experimenting till they figured out a way to use that material for stockings. And then she was able to develop probably the world's sturdiest stockings that don't rip. And she even demoed it and started to tug at her stockings and they wouldn't rip. And anyway, she's very young and she had a great sense of humor and great charisma, and I just really enjoyed listening to her. But I was so amazed at this idea of looking at something that's been around for so long now, that we've essentially inherited from our moms and our grandmothers and maybe even their moms. But she looked at it and thought, this is so inefficient. And then she created something. She's essentially an inventor. Like, that's just remarkable. But that to me was inspiring on so many levels. And for me, that's the biggest rose, is hearing her story and feeling this like sense of inspiration, but also walking away with a framework almost to look at the world and at products and problems. So for me, that was the highlight. There were a few other highlights, like Molly Burke was there, and she is a very inspiring content creator who's blind. And I had always enjoyed her content, but seeing her in person and hearing her story in person and hearing some of the challenges that the disabled community go through, and just the way that she presents those challenges, but also the opportunities and the need for inclusion and access was also very remarkable and very inspiring, and I enjoyed that a lot as well. So for me, those two talks were, yeah, they made it worth the trip, basically. The rest of the talks were okay, and the experience overall, I definitely did the right choice just showing up for half a day because the commitment is too much and I'm not in the right mental state to like be away from my environment and my laptop and work for that long. But all in all, it was good. Anyway, I guess that's pretty much all that's been on my mind.